The Australians were cheerful blokes. I'd sing them, "Oh, pistol packing mama, lay that pistol down. Pistol packing mama, lay that pistol down. My mother-in-law is dead and gone, the last to near return. She's up there with the angels now, she was too tough to burn." Yeah. When we were stuck on a beach somewhere, and we were overlooked by still standing coconut trees and some of these trees with the weird roots that came down. I think they're called banyan trees, but I'm not sure, I don't remember. And I always, instead of throwing out the barrel, even though it was warped, and to save wear and tear on my barrel, and if we were right near an LST, and the LST was loaded with pallets of ammunition, I would always get as many boxes of ammunition as I could and bring them over to the gun. And then I'd switch barrels. I put this warp barrel in and fill the water jacket with water. And then before the patrols went out, I would fire at the tops of all the trees. I must have used 5 boxes at some time. That's 5 times 250 rounds. And by then the water was all boiling out of the gun, and if I didn't hit anybody, at least I scared the shit out of them. You know, a lot of what I did was instinctive. I didn't think of what I was doing too much. I did it because it made sense at the time. See, the trouble with combat patrols in the jungle is no matter how close you are to each other, you're going to spread out. Somebody has longer legs than the other one. If somebody has already opened the brush in front of him, it's not so hard for you to open it, so you're close to him. But by the time somebody else has come up, it's pushed back again. So you're all over the damn place. And if there's a trail, don't get the idea that the trails, you know, like real trails. They were like this wide. Just you know, put one foot in front of another. We got caught in an ambush, and the first thing the Jap would do, it was interesting because I once, on another patrol, I took a break and I saw where the Japs had set up an ambush. What they would do, there was all this brush, they would thin out an opening. There was barely an opening. But then they would pull the pin on their grenade, pull the brush aside where that was thin, hit the percussion cap on their helmet, and then throw it onto the trail or near the trail. It was a good tactic because we couldn't tell which was thin brush or thick brush. On this particular ambush, Davies was in front of me, and the grenade landed right at his feet, but a couple of pieces of it went past him, and one of them hit me in the hand. And it wasn't my turn to carry a piece of the machine gun, and the other guys had turned around and ran back down the trail with the gun, and they'd gone back. They had pulled back. But I was knocked down by the blast that killed Davies. So when I finally, pulled myself together, I threw a grenade from where that grenade had come from. And the Japs had scattered. So when I came to, I was all alone, slightly dazed. with a piece of metal in my hand, and I was bleeding. So I unbuttoned my shirt and I stuck my hand in, and my pistol was cocked. Now my pistol was loaded, but it wasn't cocked. So I took the safety off and I cocked it, and I went back down the trail because I knew we had a light machine gun up on the next ridge, which was everybody was supposed to gather around. And I started howling Lollapalooza. The reason is that the Japs couldn't say, they'd say Raraparuza, you know. This was a tactic we were taught. And when I got there was an aid man, and he took a look. He said, I can't do anything with that piece of iron, but he sprinkled soap on it and he bandaged me up.
So it was still sticking out of your hand?
Oh yeah, right out of my thumb. Still have the scar. It had hit the bone. So I went with the next crew down to the field hospital. And I got on line with the other guys, and the doctor took a look at my WIA tag, and he had like a duckbill scissor, and he stuck it on and cut off the bandage, and he saw where everything was stuck together. And he took something like a plier, and he grabbed the iron and yanked the whole thing out, scab and all. I hollered, and he said, shut up, there's hurt men inside, you know. And he sprayed it with some kind of green stuff, and he stapled it together open, and he packed it with sulfothiazole ointment. That's what they had. He said, the reason we're doing that is so it will heal from the bottom.
And so it wouldn't trap any infection inside?
Yeah. And he bandaged me up. No, he didn't even bandage me up. He said, go, the ward boy will take care of you from now on. Once he had me stapled and packed, the ward boy bandaged me. And since I was a walking wounded, and they didn't have enough tents for the wounded, they had a tent fly, and they were putting litters, clean litters, across a couple of coconut logs. I was given a blanket, and that's where I stayed.
For how long?
It wasn't too long, maybe a couple of weeks. Charlie was my friend. He was a young kid from Cleveland. He wasn't very big, but he was strong. I saw him drag a 200-pound wounded guy undercover so he could give him first aid.
Charlie was your medic?
He was a medic. And he was all over the place, as medics are supposed to be. But whenever things quieted down, he would always come back and leave one of his, he always carried 2 of these medical bags, but he'd leave one of his medical bags in our machine gun foxhole, and then he'd help me improve the hole so it would be roomy enough for all of us. And he would take his turn at guard duty. In cutting a field of fire, you tried not to cut too much brush, but occasionally you had to make it a notch in a sapling and pull it over and then cut it down. In pulling down the sapling, I split it. I cut 2 pieces off, smoothed it down, so it was like one flat on one side and round on the other. I smoothed it out, and I brought it to him. He said, boy, that's a fancy splint. And I said, well, I had an advanced first aid badge when I was in the Boy Scouts. We became friendly because we were the only 2 Jewish guys in the whole goddamn platoon. We were both married, incidentally. And I couldn't tell her much about my wife because I didn't know much about her. I only knew her for a couple of months before we got married.
Was he armed?
Oh, yes. He picked up a carbine. He got rid of that helmet with the white circle and the red cross because the Aussies told him that the Japs use it for target practice. The Jap medics were armed also. They were armed with a rifle and bayonet. And the Japs did not sign the Geneva Conventions, so that they felt that every American soldier was a target. So what happened is that one night he was on guard duty, And it had rained, so even though you slant the bottom of your foxhole so that all the rainwater would gather at one end, it was still wet. And we were 2 on and 2 off. That guard duty for 2 hours and 2 hours were off. So he was standing there, you know, looking out. We had 2 two-man foxholes with a little arch and a parapet in front of it, and only the muzzle over the parapet, and it was covered with a poncho, because not only didn't we want the gun to get rusty, we didn't want the belts to get wet. And I was sitting on the helmet, my back against the foxhole, my feet in front of it. I had my pistol cocked. It was cocked and loaded around in the chamber, and the safety was on, and that was in my lap. I awakened. I heard Davis grunt, and I looked up, and there were 2 Japs with their bayonets in Davis, and I released the safety, and I shot both Japs, 1 shot each. They fell back, pulled out their bayonets and rifles, and I rolled down we were on a little ridge. They rolled down the ridge. But what happened is Davis' intestines had fallen out. And I grabbed him and I put his intestines back in and I held him. And the other, of course, my shots had wakened everybody. And it was almost daylight. And the 2 guys in the other foxhole on the other side of the gun said, throw them out, because it's going to be daylight and there might be a counterattack. So I picked them up and I threw them out. And I took my shovel and I scraped the pieces of him out of the bottom because of the flies. And I threw that out. And I don't know if I was crying or if I wasn't, but I know I took the poncho off the gun and I checked everything. And I folded the poncho and I sat on it, and I'm watching. Sure enough, they came. And that was the end of Charlie. I had to let Davis lay down there with those Jap bodies for 2 days, and I watched him swell up, you know, and collapse. It was very disturbing. We were pretty noisy. If you take a rifle company and a heavy weapons company coming in and digging in, they didn't know exactly. They tried to have snipers in the trees that were also observers, but they weren't too sure. And a lot of our riflemen didn't bother digging in. They find a hollow, and they just lie down in the hollow.
Defilade, I think they call it?
Defilade, yeah. And they'd get up on their knees, you know, to fire, because the M1, and they all had M1s or BARs, you know, can throw out quite a volume of fire.
One of the big advantages that we had over the Germans and the Japanese.
Yeah.
They were using bolt-action weapons where you lose your sight line every time you cock the bolt. Our guys had 8 shots, bam, 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 straight out.
That's right. See, what happened with the Australians is interesting. As they pulled the Australians out, the Australians left their Tommy guns behind. They were old, you know, old model, had a handle in the front, but they worked.
With the cocking lever on the top?
Yeah, and so we had in the rifle company quite a lot of Tommy guns too. And sometimes a guy would carry a Tommy gun and his M1, because we couldn't move fast through the jungles, and you know, and you get to feel more like a pack horse than anything else when you're in the infantry.
Yeah, I notice you still are like that, because whenever we get together, you're always carrying a big bag full of something, books or food or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. I'm always, because I feel that
you're always carrying stuff.
I'm always carrying stuff. I still am. Well, what happened was we had a couple of crazy riflemen, Cartwright and Bradshaw.
And these were Southerners?
Kentucky and Tennessee, I think it was. I used to kid them and said, you never had a pair of shoes until you joined the Army, you know. And they used to creep around. And they came back, and the machine gun was up. There was like a little valley, and there was like this ridge coming up to where we were. And I figured if I dug in the machine gun up there, I could cover both valleys. But when they came back and they said that it looks like the Japs are gathering and they're going to come up, I had to come at you from both sides. And I said, geez, if we only had a machine gun down there so we could get them from both flanks. So...
and down there was what? There was a little rise down
no,
from
the
ridge?
valley was getting lower and lower, but it was still higher than the two places where the Japs are going to be gathering.
I see.
So I figured, what the hell? I put a fresh belt in the gun, and I wrapped it around the receiver, and I gave it to Hennessy, and he crawled down to where Bradshaw and Cartwright said there was a little hollow down there. And then I took I didn't take the water can, just the tripod, and I crawled down there too. And I shredded the tripod so the gun was very low. And sure enough, the Japs they weren't too noisy, but they were noisy enough. And the brush was kind of thin enough so I could see where there were groups of men. And there was one officer running around hitting the guys with his sword scabbard. I don't know what for. In any event, when I saw that there was enough to make it worthwhile, I fired half a belt into that group. Then I swung the gun around, gave it to Hennessy, and Hennessy fired at the other group. Then I loosened the swivel, picked up the gun, and crawled back, and I said, Hennessy, you bring the tripod. Meanwhile, there was a lot of screaming down below and indiscriminate firing all over the goddamn place. There wasn't a big crowd from either side when their attack started. So I figured, I thinned them out a little. And that was the purpose. Colonel Roosevelt came by. He said, where the hell were you? So I told him what I had done. He said, that's a damn good tactic. I said, yes, sir. What can you say to the colonel, But I never tried it again. I don't know how risky it was because a lot of the troops we were killing were a mixture of labor battalions and troops that had been in Manchuria. They didn't seem to be all that well disciplined. At least they weren't bulletproof. The Japanese officers had a lot of written material that they needed or used or whatever. And they had these, some of them had these pigskin leather map cases. And some of them had rubberized map cases, canvas map cases. It seemed there was as much paperwork in the Japanese army as there was in ours. One of my jobs was going through the pockets and the knapsacks of the men I was killing and taking the photographs and the written material and turning them into headquarters. And I get a lot of the stuff back, but mostly I didn't get back. In China, they took a lot of group photographs because they had very few casualties. And they were very proud soldiers. Now, this is another interesting thing. This is a temple that's well known. A lot of the soldiers came from this part of Yokohama. All kinds of pictures. In order to be able to mail these home, They had to be stamped. The ones that weren't, I had Lou Wire use the chaplain's stamp and sign the chaplain's name. I only went on 14 patrols, and we'd get clobbered on about half of them.
Lay that pistol down, babe, lay that pistol down.